Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to go to Joe next. Taylor just mentioned that we may need to illustrate how dire the situation is. Could you illustrate that for us, Joe, in your own words? How dire is the situation? And Joe, just unmute at the
Oh,
bottom,
sorry.
right?
I've only been on this app 5 months.
No worries, no worries. Good to have you.
um, Still forgetting to unmute. So look, scientists have known for well over a century that uh, carbon dioxide is a heat trapping gas, and we have been putting tens of billions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere for a very long time from burning coal, oil, and natural gas. And basically, that puts it's like adding more and more blankets of heat trap on top of you in your bed. And on our current emissions pathway, the planet would warm some maybe 7 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. And the kind of consequences would be, well, the heat wave that we're seeing now in the southwest and west, that kind of thing would become just the normal climate. The wildfires that have been rocking California and the West Coast, those would become normal. The super hurricanes that have been devastating this country and other countries, whether it was Maria hitting Puerto Rico, or Harvey hitting Texas, Houston. It's really a matter of uh, and sea level rise, and that's the other big impact besides the extreme weather, is the rise in seas. And we could be headed towards 5-6 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century, which would render places like Miami uninhabitable. And when you add it all together, when you add the super storms on top of the sea level rise and the extreme weather, and the ocean acidification, you're talking about a planet that would have a great deal of difficulty feeding. It'd have difficulty feeding 8 billion people, let alone the 10 billion that we are projected to have by the end of the century. So we are out of time. The scientists have said we need to keep total warming below uh, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius. And we don't, in order to achieve that target, we need to cut the world's carbon pollution down to close as possible to zero by mid-century. You've heard the phrase net zero by 2050. Um, that is that is what the planet needs to shoot for. We absolutely have to be zero sometime between 2050, 2060, 2070 timeframe if we want to stay well below the danger zone of total warming. And that requires us to basically stop building new fossil fuel infrastructure. That was the finding of the Energy Information the International Energy Agency just a couple of weeks ago in a major report that people can find online, which spells out exactly how we go to zero. And the most important way to go to zero is by taking renewable power from where it is today is about 30% of total electricity production to 90% in by mid-century. A tremendous increase in particularly solar and wind. Those are the two superstars that have come down in price dramatically. I mean, over 99% in the past couple of decades, and are now the cheapest form of electricity that you can get. We just need to dramatically increase the rate at which we're deploying them. I mean, and the scale of effort is like, I think the IEA said it was like $4 trillion a year in investment, um, in clean energy. So uh, one way or another, we are going to get off of carbon. Either we're going to be smart about it and do it fast and proactively and avoid catastrophic change, or we're going to dawdle some more. Scientists have been telling us we needed to do this for decades now. But if we dawdle much longer, this is the decade of destiny for this country and the world. If the decisions we make in the coming next few years are literally could irreversibly change the climate of the world and cause the great ice sheets to melt irreversibly, um, for a period that would last centuries. So, it's up to us. People are gonna they're not gonna be writing books calling us the greatest generation if we don't rapidly increase our deployment of clean energy and start phasing out fossil fuels.
Thank you very much for that, Joe. Dr. Robert Consulis, you're an anesthesiologist, early climate advocate, founder of French Creek Valley Conservancy. You led the fight against a proposed tire burning plant in 2012 in Geneva Marsh, the largest natural wetland in Pennsylvania. What are you currently passionate about in the fight to prevent disastrous results in climate change? What is mission critical for you today?
Well, I don't have a big impact on the world. I'm trying to do things personally, like, I think everybody, or not everybody, some people are doing. Um, the When I first got really sort of frightened by the seriousness of the science, which I saw, uh, in when I got married in the late 1980s, we had a really hot summer, and I was reading about a guy, James Hansen, who is still sort of a great guru and leader in the whole science of climate change. I started to read about it and understand what Joe was saying, that this the science is inevitable and what's happening is pretty scary. So it kind of pushed me to do things, in terms of local activism. I was worked most of my career in a fairly small city in northern Pennsylvania, Meadville, and the hospital I was working in, at that point, I had some political influence in how things were run, and I was able to get them, probably in the 1990s to develop energy saving techniques to increase their insulation, and at the same time they worked a joint deal. The two largest institutions in this town, which was included, and Allegheny College was included. There was a far-sighted chemist who was the president of Allegheny College, Richard Cook, and he believed in this as well. And so those two institutions started to take steps to become more energy efficient, and I think it was fairly far-sighted for both those institutions to do that. Eventually, we put solar panels on our own house, so 14 years ago, and really haven't had to pay electric bills, which is nice, but makes me feel kind of better about the world. I'm presently working with the city, some of the city planners, and some activists in northwestern Pennsylvania to to develop a climate action plan. For the city of Meadville, which is, as you know, many, all states, and I believe all states, certainly Pennsylvania, and the larger cities in the state of Pennsylvania have already developed climate action plans and are working on them. It's the real challenge is, the smaller municipalities don't have the resources to develop something like a climate action plan, and they don't have the resources to build solar. But basically, in where we are, solar is the only real viable option for renewable energy. So, I'm very passionate about trying to find ways to move the agenda in one small community, and that's kind of all we can do. It's uh, to me, it's exciting but very frustrating. I have very good friends who are bright, scientists who believe in climate change, and and I sort of tell them about solar panels and how good I feel about it, and it makes a lot of sense. Blah blah blah. And people have all the resources to do it and have a good roof to put them on, or have lots of land they could put solar panels on the ground. And they go, well, it just doesn't make sense financially to do that. Uh, it was like, I'm not sure, that's the big issue here. But, when I was involved in fighting this, and I won't go into the story of fighting the tire burning power plant that was proposed to be near our house.
That sounds horrific, by the way.
It's terrified
Good
and really,
God.
really, really stupid. And I mean, you talk about a dangerous type of incineration. Burn tires and see what you get. I mean, I'm sure Joe has some concept, understands the kind of dangerous chemicals that would be produced by this. But anyways, it's kind of an old fight at this point, and I've almost forgotten about it. But during we had a public meeting, and a bunch of union guys came out, and not bad guys, but they were like going, hey, why should we do this? We can't afford it. I said, well, I put solar panels in my house. I can afford it. They said, well, we can't do it. We're working guys. And I'm, but at the same time, they're driving $35,000 and $45,000 pickup trucks. And, I mean, I guess it depends on where you put your priorities and how you envision the future for, not just yourselves, but, obviously, future generations. But anyways, and of course, I'm very proud of my daughter for being involved in, she's been selling renewable energy for several years and very successful doing it. And my other daughter is also interested in similar issues. But, so I guess I'm 74 and I'm starting to feel like, wow, I'm not going to change the world myself, but I just like to change a little bit at a time. And so anyways, that's why I'm glad for people like Taylor and Georgia and others that are, taking steps to, make some real changes.
Well, we definitely appreciate you, Robert, your epistemology and your passion, for what you've done to help preserve and slow down the rate of catastrophe is absolutely commendable. So we thank you and salute you. My question for the panel here is, where do we as a country stand relative to these issues? Is our current administration taking them seriously enough? How do we feel about that?
Well, the Biden administration certainly is taking the issue very seriously. Who actually pulled us out of the big climate agreement that was reached December 2015 in Paris, where all the nations of the world, nearly 200 countries, unanimously agreed to take the necessary measures to keep total warming below the 2 degrees Celsius level and leave most fossil fuels in the ground. The current administration has campaigned on very aggressive climate action. It has appointed some of the country's leaders in climate action and clean energy to high-level positions, including people like John Kerry and Jigar Shah. So, but that's sort of the good news. The bad news is that we're going to see this play out in the next few weeks. The key for the Biden administration to achieve the emissions reductions that it says it's going to achieve is this infrastructure bill, but an infrastructure bill which spends several hundreds of billions of dollars on clean energy deployment and technology. And we will see whether that requires at least one Senator Manchin of West Virginia, a coal state, to support this massive infusion of funds into clean energy. So it's we're a very divided country, as I think people know, and one political party is willing to take aggressive action, and the other party tries to block action. And we will see how the politics of this plays out in the coming weeks and months. But it is a very, very fraught situation.
I heard the Keystone Pipeline was just canceled. And now I've been hearing there's some pressure to the U.S. government to cancel something called Line 3. Can someone speak on Line 3? Joe, are you trying to speak? Did we lose you? Taylor or Dr. Robert, would you like to touch on Line 3?
Line 3's got to go. The question is, will the Biden administration, sort of step into the fray here? I'm not close enough to that, the politics to understand what their stance is on it. I don't think we should downplay the importance of stopping the flow of the tar sands oil from Canada. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's a big step, and I think everybody should take that kind of activism seriously.
And Dr. Robert, for the people who are just joining us, tell us, what is Line 3 and why do you feel that it must be stopped?
Line 3 is it's actually an existent line of that's been used for petroleum that flows from Canada into the United States. And I believe it goes through, Line 3 specifically goes through Minnesota. And I think that it goes through part of Michigan. The governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, has, I believe, has saying that she's going to try to shut it down from her at her where it goes through her state. So what this line has been in existence for a while, but they're rebuilding the line and giving it much larger capacity. And my understanding is so it can carry, the slurry of tar sands oil for processing in the United States. And that's a very large source of carbon dioxide that should never be released into the atmosphere. I mean, the only reason to do it is to enrich some very rich people who are exploiting the tar sands oil in Canada, and there's no reason for our country or for the world to permit that to happen. So, yes, stop it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine. I haven't introduced myself yet, but I was invited by Alana and Georgia tonight. And I am a climate scientist, but also a designer. I just wanted to clarify, a big reason why Line 3 is a problem is because it is going through sovereign tribal land. Those indigenous agreements with the United States of America should be respected, obviously, and haven't been respected in numerous cases, like with the Dakota Access Pipeline, with the Keystone XL pipeline, which was recently abandoned by their developer. I think it's just important to bring in that aspect. That's why it's really a big deal, and that's why people are not only risking their lives, but risking their freedom, essentially, right? Like, a lot of people are getting arrested. There's a lot of military aggression and police aggression towards protesters. So I think it'll be really interesting to see if anything happens or if people start to care. I've noticed that most people don't know about Line 3 or haven't been exposed to it. It's not really talked about necessarily as it should be. But yeah, Robert, great explanation. I just wanted to include the fact that it's a tribal issue as well.
Thank you so much for that, Catherine, and thank you for joining us today. So good to have you. This question is for anyone here on the panel. Um, for years, natural gas was considered a bridge fuel for the United States. Is that still a viable concept?
No. uh, what does burn more cleanly than coal, but it burns a lot less cleanly than renewables. And as a result, uh, we, it's a fossil fuel. Carbon atom, four hydrogen atoms. When you burn it, you release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And, we have dawdled for so long in failing to respond to climate change that as the International Energy Agency said just a couple of weeks ago, we have to stop building new infrastructure to extract fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. So, the good news is that renewables have achieved a status where they are the cheapest form of electricity. I mean, we're at a point now where there have been bids in auctions for solar power in multiple countries where the cost is under 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And most people who are listening to this, at least in the United States, are probably paying 10, 11, 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So, renewables are here now, and they're what we have to devote all of our resources to. Any significant amount of money spent on natural gas or oil infrastructure is literally going to have to be shut down in the coming decade or two. So no, natural gas is not a bridge. The other problem with natural gas is mostly composed of methane, CH4. And methane is a very strong greenhouse gas, particularly over a 20-year period. It's about 85 times more, traps heat 85 times more strongly than CO2 does over the same period of time. So, and the problem is it's impossible to extract and transport and burn natural gas without some amount of methane escaping and heating up the planet also. So, no, natural gas, I'm afraid it's long past the time when it was a bridge fuel to a renewable future. Renewables are here. We don't need a bridge. We just need a green light.
No, it's definitely really well put. Also, yeah, and I brought up Catherine, so welcome. And I just want to definitely, I completely agree with that. And just like utilizing the technology that's already available is something that I think is really critical, especially right now. And we're at a place where we can do that, and there's no reason to not. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Georgia. I guess my next question is, I heard that China just built a brand new nuclear fusion reactor. I don't know if I said that right, but I heard it was something to the order of 10 or 100 times hotter than the sun, which kind of sounds a little concerning. What is the role of nuclear power in maintaining, I guess, energy here in the United States until renewables become more viable? What are the plans with nuclear power here domestically?
Well, I'll jump in again, Dr. Joe Rome. There are not many. There's like in the last 30 years, there's been only one nuclear plant that has made it all the way to deployment. The thing about nuclear is it's just very, very expensive. And over the past 2 decades, it's actually gotten more expensive, so that electricity from nuclear power might cost 10, 12, 15 cents a kilowatt hour in an era where renewables are pennies per kilowatt hour. So we're not in the market economies of the world. You do not see many nuclear plants built. I'm talking about in France, which is heavily nuclear. They aren't building more nuclear plants. Great Britain. So, I think we're at a point again where it's worthwhile to do research into sort of next generation nuclear plants. That's what Bill Gates and others are doing, trying to develop smaller and cheaper modular reactors. But that has not been proven yet to be cost effective. That's going to take a lot of R&D and a lot of testing. I think for this decade, the decade of destiny, we're going to have to bet the farm on solar and wind and other renewables if we're going to avoid catastrophic climate change.
And Joe, I don't want to go down a tangent here, but I believe Fukushima is still an issue in Japan when we had the tsunami, and I believe it's still leaking a bunch of radioactive water into our oceans. Are there any updates on Fukushima and what that looks like, a timeline looks like to a full repair?
Well, look, the Fukushima was a one of the great nuclear disasters, more closer to Chernobyl in its catastrophic impact. I think it's showed people that it's challenging to, you can't build nuclear plants super cheap because you have to put in a lot of redundant systems to make sure that they don't melt down catastrophically. I think it's safe to say that one of the results of Fukushima was that it led to a reconsideration of nuclear power in Europe and elsewhere. And as I said, if you look at market economies, I'm not talking about China or Russia, but real market economies, they're simply not building new nuclear plants of any consequence because they're so incredibly expensive. Doesn't mean that you know technology investment in next generation nuclear is a waste of money. It just means that if your goal is to cut carbon pollution sharply this decade, you're going to be doing it with renewables.
I heard Germany has a supercar, one of the fastest in the world, that runs on salt water. I heard a few years ago that the Navy was developing fighter jets that ran on salt water. Currently, we've got plug-in hybrid, we've got electric cars. How much of an impact can all of these technologies have on the future of our environment?
I mean, I'm not sure in terms of like actual numbers, but I think that definitely when you're able to have um, something that was once emitting greenhouse gases that's now running, if you're able to like have an electric car that's running off of solar, for instance, then you're able to make that effectively carbon neutral. Um, and I'd say that that's definitely something that over the long term, and if it's put amongst a large amount of people, is obviously going to make a big impact. So I'd say it's something to go for, would be my thought on that.
Jenna, I'd like to, before pursuing this subject, is it possible to go back and just deal with one issue related to nuclear that I think is really cogent? In this part of the country, in Pennsylvania and Ohio and some other states, we have old nuclear power plants that are, but are still working efficiently, free electricity. Sure the number, but I think it might be even 30%. Maybe somebody else knows the number more exactly. But there is a political fight going on to try to find support from the states to support nuclear produced electricity, which is more expensive, as Joe's mentioned, that more expensive than renewable and is more expensive than from natural gas. But the advantage is that it's not producing CO2. And I think that certainly, there's a lot of fear and justifiable fear of and concern about building, more plants, nuclear plants. But I'm concerned that if we don't have the political will to support these and during this very key upcoming decade, if we don't keep these nuclear plants that are presently safely producing CO2-free electricity, then we're going to have a big bump in CO2 production coming out of this state and some other states. So that's kind of my big concern about nuclear. I think it is a little bit of a bridge, and sure, nobody wants to see another disaster, another Chernobyl, but that's another political issue that almost is being played out right now. Sorry to interrupt in the midst of that discussion.
Oh, not at all. Thank you for the wonderful insights, Dr. Robert. I wanted to go over to Zen, who I've seen in a lot of rooms. Super smart, intelligent guy, investor, operator, and a partner. A lot of different companies, especially in sustainable energy and sustainable transportation. Zen, any thoughts on the future of sustainable energy and transportation that could be viable solutions that we may not see as totally obvious?
Thanks, Wolf. Well, electric vehicles are the solution, really. And not only electric vehicles, but urban mobility electric vehicles are the future. When vehicles are autonomous, we don't have to make so many of them. Mid last year, I started an organization called Zeta, the Zero Emission Transportation Association, with some executives from Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, Proterra, and a few other companies through the whole supply chain, through the whole EV supply chain. And the goal is to drive 100% new EV sales, new car sales to be electric by 2030. And I think we're on target to do that. When we set out that goal, Bloomberg was projecting something like electric vehicles. And clearly we're blowing past that. Maybe as soon as next year. And so we should have 100% new vehicle sales be electric by 2030. And so that's exciting. I think that's going to play a major role. You take so many carbon emitting vehicles off the roads for every one that you replace. And there are some interesting technologies being developed in carbon capture right now, which we may be able to integrate into vehicles. So not only can we take out ICE vehicles from the roads, but we can also, in the near future, maybe 4 or 5 years from now, start capturing carbon as well. And not only capturing carbon, but you can also capture so many pollutants that are emitted by other vehicles, including brake dust, which is cancerous, and other tailpipe emissions, which are also cancerous. So I think the future looks very, very bright, and the Biden administration is playing a major role in helping with consumer incentives via something like between $7,500 and a $12,500 consumer incentive at point of sale, depending on the type of vehicle, the manufacturer, and where the vehicle is made as well. So that's going to drive adoption very quickly. They're working on removing the caps, and actually we're doing that work through Zeta right now, working on with the Senate to remove the caps, because previously we had the consumer incentive caps for EVs set at 200,000 per OEM, and those will be removed and replaced with the 400,000 cap. So, yeah, we're all heading in the right direction, and we'll get there sooner than anybody thinks we will.
Wonderful, Zen. Thank you so much for that. Super insightful. I brought up a few people from the audience. We've got a lot of hand raising. I just wanted to get to some questions here. I want to introduce Lily Tong. Welcome to the stage, Lily.
Thank you so much. I see your name is Jin. Sorry, I was about to say Wolf Lion.
Well, either one, all of it works.
Yeah, so perfect. Thank you so much for having me on stage. Actually, I have I have two questions. The first one was actually about nuclear fusion, but I think that has been answered. So I want to talk about Bitcoin actually. So I recently did an episode on my podcast, and sorry for the lack of context. I am a podcaster and a YouTuber, and I realized that there's three challenges that we currently face with renewable energy that make it really hard to scale. Right, the first one being intermittency, and this applies to solar and wind. The second one being energy storage bottleneck. So clearly, our battery storage capacities cannot nearly capture and store the energy that we get from sun and wind. And then the last one is grid congestion, whereas renewable power plants are usually built far away in remote areas, far away from the site of usage. So you have to build long transmission lines all the way to the cities and industries where they're actually being used, and energy is lost along the way in the form of heat and friction, which is extremely inefficient. And I think someone previously, I believe it was Word Ninja, once again, I'm going by your handle, spoke about the lack of political will to really subsidize the renewable energy industry. So I thought Bitcoin would be an interesting complement because the Bitcoin market is mostly dominated by consumers. I would say so that's everyday, like that's average people like you and I. So we can all participate in the Bitcoin market, and Bitcoin basically acts as this money battery, right? Like every Bitcoin miner is incentivized to find the cheapest cost of electricity to maximize their profit margin when they're mining Bitcoin, and that just so happens to be renewables because in recent years, solar and wind the cost has gone down and is actually now lower than fossil fuels. So naturally, each Bitcoin miner is incentivized to use renewables to power the Bitcoin mining process. So what I see is that it actually complements renewable energy generation, and we can potentially rapidly scale mass adoption of renewables with Bitcoin, since all this excess energy produced by these renewable power plants that we aren't able to capture and store can be harnessed directly by Bitcoin miners. And then during peak hours, when it is more profitable for renewable power plants to sell it back onto the grid, Bitcoin mining can be turned on and off at a moment's notice. So it is a flexible, load, interruptible consumer. So I'm just wondering, for moderators on the stage, how how do you think about, what do you think about us leveraging Bitcoin as a way to drive back onto the grid? Bitcoin mining can be turned on and off at a moment's notice. So it is a flexible, load, interruptible consumer. So I'm just wondering, for moderators on the stage, how how do you think about, what do you think about us leveraging Bitcoin as a way to drive mass adoption of renewables? And do you see that as a more effective way that civilians can participate in, as opposed to waiting for government intervention to subsidize the industry? Thank you so much.
I think the question is, will Bitcoin and crypto, in terms of the crypto that's built on a blockchain, that's proof of work versus proof of stake, will that be enough of an incentive to advance renewable solutions, hydroelectric power solutions? Because Bitcoin miners are incentivized to use it, but as more and more people adopt the currency and store value and the ability to make money and trade, will that help propel sustainable sources of energy? Does anyone want to take that?
Thoughts? I recently saw a graph that Elon Musk posted, since I know they were accepting Bitcoin and then they stopped because of how much energy it was using. And so I've dabbled with crypto since 2017 and obviously working in solar, which is an interesting concept in general. But I think that's a great point you bring up, Lily, as far as could it drive more adoption? And it's one of those things where I think I'm in a weird way like a neutral, like I'm not sure if it's a positive or a negative, because although it does use clean energy, we're also using so much more power to mine Bitcoin. And I think there's a lot less miners than there are people using it. So I think by increasing the transaction load, which obviously requires more and more energy, in a weird way, Bitcoin, I think, is still, even using a lot of solar energy for miners, is actually still increasing the total power that the world uses, which, since we're not getting all from renewable, it's kind of not, I think, heading in the right direction. I think solar can't keep up with the crypto demand, as far as Bitcoin. So I'm really curious in the other people on the board's opinions, because I know, I'm just curious with Bitcoin, as it gets more and more expensive to mine, requires more and more energy, will that incentive still be there in the future for them? Or will that lead to Bitcoin just kind of slowing down dramatically because it's just too expensive to mine relative to the profit gained from that? But I'd love to hear what anyone else thinks on this as well.
I want to quickly clarify something that Taylor has said. So I believe there is a common misconception that Bitcoin mining uses a lot of energy, when in reality, most of that energy is excess energy generated by renewables that otherwise would have been lost because we aren't able to capture and store it quickly enough. So there is a renewable power plant in China, in Sichuan province, where 70% of the renewable energy generated every year is lost because of, like I said, the energy storage bottleneck that I run into. So you can basically plug a Bitcoin mining operation right next to it that can readily use this energy. So I don't think it's actually increasing the overall consumption, but I could be wrong. I stand corrected.
Well, definitely. Thank you so much for those thoughts, Lily. Lot to think about. Appreciate you. Let's see. Next up, we've got Srinath Reddy. Welcome to the stage.
Hi, Jin. Thanks for letting me talk here. So, Jin, I have a few questions around renewable energy and the business around it. So, basically, we were trying to have a startup which is kind of a solar roofing solutions, and what we figured out is it involved a lot of upfront cost, and it was a huge investment for us, and also there were a lot of not so much adoption as Lily was saying, and also not a lot of political commitment in terms of incentives and so on. So if I have to ask you, what would be the uh, area which young entrepreneurs should focus in embarking on this cleaner climate or renewable energy side of business? What is your suggestion? And for me, what I think is returns from these kind of business would be a cleaner climate and a better future. I don't know what in terms of the value or the returns. Other than that, like how we can make the business grow, unless you are like a big companies like a Tesla or other companies. So if I have to ask you that suggestion, what that would be?
I think that was a lot to unpack. Can you ask that first question in one sentence?
Yeah, I mean, what would be your suggestion for young entrepreneurs who wants to start something in renewable space? What is that key focus that you would be suggesting?
Answers to this. I have some thoughts, but I know I talked last time. So my thought, what area do you live in, Srinath? Like what part of the world?
I'm in California, but this one, when I started, it was in India. Yeah, I'm looking for both California as well as India, Taylor.
I started my solar consulting company as well. What I will tell you is, if you look hard enough, a lot of times it can cost a lot less than you think to put pieces together. What I mean by that is, have you heard of the idea of drop shipping, where you kind of like you'd order something from website 1 and ship it to person 2, but you never actually even touch the product, you just marked it up a little bit, and therefore you have a business now where you don't actually even own any of the product. I think with renewable energy, and no matter where you're starting at, because even with our company, it started just like Jeff Bezos in his garage, it was just me. And then it was just me doing sales. And then we grew to 2 to 3, and now we're about at 9. And we're able to scale a little bit better. But I'd say the most important thing is just starting with whatever you have, put together what you have. A lot of times you can find suppliers and installers that can front a lot of those funds up front as far as doing the project, and then you can just sell the project for higher than that cost, obviously, to then earn a profit, to then reinvest those dollars, so on and so forth. That would be what I would suggest.
So how about any other areas other than the solar roofing? Like how about something like a battery technology, or any other areas you will be suggesting, Taylor or Jen? Anyone?
I'm not the expert here. I'm here to host and mod. I like to ask questions, but I did read an interesting story on high snobiety. This was about 3 months ago, and some company came up with something called the diamond graphene nano battery. Maybe I said that wrong. Maybe it's the nano graphene diamond battery. Anyway, it's something like that. But this battery, I believe it's theoretical. They said that using graphene and whatever the technology is, that it would last 28,000 human years of charging cycles, which essentially means it's free energy. Um, has anyone researched anything into graphene batteries? And does anyone know what the heck I'm talking about?
I've heard of it, but not the specifics. Would love to know.
Yeah, same thing. I heard of those technology, but not sure if it's production ready or the consumer ready. Just theoretically, I heard about it. Yeah.
I think that there are a staggering amount of money going into advanced battery research, billions of dollars a year. And I think, we are just in the middle of a revolution that has brought down the cost of the central battery being used in electronics and electric vehicles is the lithium ion batteries. And we're now, I would say, sort of, as I said, midway through the technology advancement process. Now, companies are starting to introduce solid state lithium batteries. And I think you'll see this decade a continued 20% per year drop in cost. And as a result, most people are forecasting that electric vehicles will actually be cheaper than the cars they replace by within 5 years from now. They're already cheaper to operate and cheaper to maintain, but in the not too distant future, they'll actually be cheaper up front. And I think this revolution is why many of the world's automakers have said that they're going to get out of the business of making gasoline-powered cars. GM said, I believe, 2035, and some others have said as early as 2030.
Thank you so much for that, Joe. And next up, let's go to Dan, founder of Climate Change Cafe. How's it going, Dan?
It's going well. Thanks for bringing me up. And hello to Joe, and a special hello to Catherine, who occasionally helps me in my room. So what I wanted to do was just make some surgical comments on some of the topics that you've already covered, if that's okay.
Yes,
and
please.
First, a quick one. I agree with Robert on nuclear, and it's really important that we delineate over the next decade the difference between existing plants that are producing zero emissions electricity and the idea of new plants, be they modular or whatever. And in fact, that's a major issue right now in Illinois, where the legislative session has closed down for the year, but the governor has called everyone back for a special session. And key there is whether or not they're going to support their existing nuclear power plants in Illinois. The next thing on line 3, unfortunately, yesterday, the Minnesota Court of Appeals ruled in favor of line 3. And so the next step, and possibly the last step, is now before the U.S. District Court, where the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, will come into play, where there have been accusations that NEPA was violated so far by Enbridge in the planning and construction of Line 3. On natural gas, which, one of the interesting issues on natural gas right now is whether to continue calling it natural gas. Some people are beginning to call it fossil gas. Some people are beginning to call it methane gas, just to sort of move people away from this idea of natural. But the challenge with natural gas is its high penetration into the building sector, both residential and commercial, for heating. And that is why, as building electrification has risen, and as people realize that natural gas is a fossil fuel, and even though it burns at 50% of CO2, as Joe mentioned, there's also the methane factor, the leakage through flaring and the transportation of natural gas. But right now, the natural gas industry, and this was recently revealed, I think through a Freedom of Information Act, the gas industry out of Washington has been coordinating a campaign state by state to get legislatures to pass a ban against a ban. And by that I mean several cities, many cities now in California and elsewhere have passed a ban. They're all a little bit different, but basically they're banning new connections of natural gas. 20 states so far have passed a law banning those kind of bans, and 4 more are working to do that as we speak. So, you know, natural gas has had, as Joe pointed out, has had a good ride, but the ride should be over. The bridge should be burned, and we all have to realize that. And lastly, on natural gas is natural gas a number of years ago appropriated the term clean energy, and that was because it's cleaner than coal and oil. But that's the problem with the name clean energy as opposed to zero emissions energy. Next is on Bitcoin. And I've been in some Bitcoin rooms on Clubhouse trying to get Bitcoin proponents to understand the electricity system, both how it works and how it's regulated. And I don't have anything personal against Bitcoin, but it is a new electricity demand. And as push comes to shove in terms of you know, the different demands upon ranging from residential to regulated and, you know, electricity. And at that point, it may be a problem for Bitcoin to actually get the type of renewable electricity that it wants to. And I'm sorry, but one more, this is the end. And this is a question maybe to you, Joe. But just today, I read about an organization you probably know. It's called REN21 that works out of Paris. And they put out a report today that showed that between 2009 and 2019, that energy demand worldwide has increased, but the share of fossils serving that demand has stayed exactly the same. It was 80% in 2009, and it's 80% in 2019. So again, I mean, here is where we've got to be careful of the numbers that we see on rates of increase of renewable energy, or some of the stories written about, you know, the bright future for renewable energy. That future has to occur now. You know, it can't occur in the far off future. It has to be in the near future. And the fact that demand for coal and oil is still rising and therefore still being met, that's a real problem from a climate standpoint. And I'm sorry, that was way too long, but there were so many comments or so many points and issues that had already been raised. I just wanted to make all those comments. Thanks a lot.
Oh, that was absolutely spectacular, Dan. We would definitely love to have you join more of these conversations. That was absolutely so succinct and complete. Thank you, Dan. Next up, I'd like to give the mic to Peggy Lou. Welcome, Peggy.
Hey, hi. Thank you, Georgia, for letting me know about the room and asking me to join. I'm always here to support people who are interested in spreading the word about a cleaner, greener future. Regarding gas, there is somebody in the audience who I had the pleasure of meeting in person. My first Clubhouse contact that I met in person a few days ago in Boston, and she lives in New Hampshire. She won the Nobel Prize, essentially, the Goldman Prize for environmental action on creating the ban on fracking in New York State. And I would love to give her the mic to respond or actually add to what Dan has to say. That's Helen Slatia, and I might be butchering her last name, but she's in the pink. So I would love to give her my time to explain her 6 years of legal action as a lawyer, as a real estate lawyer, how she was able to manage that brilliant breakthrough, and then how other states have not been able to do what she's done. So I'd like to cede my microphone time to her.
I see Helen, and I've invited her up a few times. She has not accepted my invite, so I'm wondering if she may have stepped away from her phone.
Okay, well, keep pinging her because she literally did the impossible and she had a brilliant, I talk about how to change the world at societal scale, and one of the things that I teach is Trojan horse. Don't beat, your head against a brick wall, but instead you go around it. So, for example, one of my programs is food education for young kids because that is actually the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And everybody eats food, everybody loves healthy food and healthy kids. And it's also the single intervention that achieves all 17 global goals. But what she did, I guess I'll speak a little bit on her behalf while we're waiting for her to come up. She was able to use her understanding of real estate law to create a broader law that also applied to fracking, but it wasn't directly, the language wasn't directly targeting fracking. So she is, I had the pleasure of introducing my kids to her and hearing her story, and what she did was really, really difficult. I work in China, and honestly, even though it's 4 times the population, it's honestly easier to work in China than it is to work in the US. So I just wanted to give her my time if possible. If I don't know, Georgia, since you invited me, is there something specific that you would like me to focus on?
I think just, yeah, no, that's great. Absolutely. Just, anything that you have to impart specifically in regards to the future of renewable energy. And yeah, anything that you would like to share. Thank you again so much for being here.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Georgia. So my angle is, I come from, my context is that I started in the environmental field in earnest in 2006, and I started an organization, an NGO called Joint US-China Collaboration on Clean Energy. And that was out of both governments' earnest intentions to work together, and they needed somebody to help bridge the two cultures so that we could have better programmatic collaboration, because at the time there was 60 MOUs and nothing tangible to show for it. And I had a lot of people who were super interested in helping with international collaboration to make some progress in China, the largest polluter in the world. And luckily, we were able to change China 6 times over. We introduced the first classes on eco-cities. We taught 1,000 mayors across China and central government officials. We brought in this concept called smart grid, which is one of the on-ramps that makes renewable energy possible. We catalyzed clean energy. We changed lighting standards. We created the national slogan to embed sustainability into the new idea of prosperity, and we introduced the first food curriculum that was a sustainable diet. So we were able to change, I would say, the trajectory of energy use in China. And I now teach a lot of the lessons that I've learned by hook or by crook of how do you create movements that will affect sustainable, systemic change at societal scale. And so a lot of the lessons I teach are on Clubhouse in how to change the world rooms, and they're nothing that I learned at MIT or McKinsey or Harvard Kennedy School. None of those things really gave me the tools to do what we need to do. And the lessons that I learned had nothing to do with technology. It all had to do with human behavior, energetic practices, and dreaming the future so that we can accelerate the path to the future. So I'll stop there. Thanks. This is Peggy Lou, and hopefully Helen is responding.
Well,
Helen, come on up.
I definitely reached out to Helen. if you can hear us, Helen. I'm assuming that she may have stepped away from her phone because I pinged her about
Possibly.
5, 6, or 8 million times. But Peggy, you are a wonderful speaker, and we're going to have you on future iterations of this. Let's go to Sung Hee. Hello, Sung. Welcome to the stage. We've got time for one short musing or one short question before we close out here.
Hi, Jen. I'm Singy. Thanks so much for inviting me. I don't know if you covered this earlier, and forgive me if you have. It's about grid stability, renewables, and rolling blackouts that we had in California last year. But before I start with that, I have huge respect for Dan, though I would respectfully disagree that methane is cleaner than coal. I think recent research has found that the leakage rate exceeds 3% throughout the supply chain, which makes it no cleaner than coal, actually. So, but going back to renewables, so we had the rolling blackouts last summer in California, and energy economists were predicting this would be more commonplace as more renewables come online. Until we do something regarding pricing, dynamic pricing, this is separate from the time of use rates. And I know there's been something on the docket, and you can feel free to interrupt anytime if you already addressed this. There's something on the docket, the California Public Utilities Commission, from the time of Enron, regarding dynamic pricing, and there just hasn't been the political will or ability, frankly, to address this. And so we are looking at potentially more blackouts this summer and heat waves approach. And I'm wondering, and maybe it's a question for Dan as to what's being done about this. Thanks. That's it.
I can perhaps address that. I mean, when you mention Enron, it brings to mind, several things, and one of which is now being investigated in Texas with their recent heat wave. It looks like they may be in trouble once again with their electricity system. And the issue is whether or not the private owners of power plants are holding them back. Just recently, an abnormal number of power plants in Texas were down for repairs when they normally wouldn't be down for repairs. So there's that Enron issue. But as to dynamic pricing, and this is something that I've worked on for a long time, and you mentioned the time of use pricing, which is now the default option in California. And for everyone else in the room, that means that you are charged a different price depending on what time of day it is. There might be 3 buckets, morning, midday, and evening, and the electricity price might be all different depending on which segment. And then you get into a more dynamic type pricing, which could be real-time pricing. It could be some sort of bifurcated model. There's one called critical peak pricing, where so many times a year, the price goes up during the peak period really, really high. And in exchange for being on that kind of a rate, you get a lower rate for the rest of the year. But there's been great political opposition to these kind of electricity rates, even though there have been 20 years of successful pilots and research efforts that show no matter what type of customer you are, low income or high income, no matter where you are in the US, that you are fine having that as a rate option. But somehow, when folks are put in a political seat, they get nervous about moving that kind of rate forward. But to tie back to renewables, right? I mean, renewables, as was noted earlier, are intermittent. And the more dynamic a grid you have, the more smart a grid you have, using all sorts of distributed energy resources and all sorts of different pricing, then you can have the renewables come in and out, have the storage come in and out, have the prices help in doing that. And you get a smarter grid, but also a greener grid. And I don't know if I answered your question, even though I said a lot, but I'm very familiar with that. I'd be happy to talk with you offline about that.
Well, I'm worried about this coming summer months and rolling blackouts because we don't have a pricing solution yet. And our grid is becoming more renewable in California.
Yes, that's true. I mean, part of the idea is trying to move the demand around. by having different pricing and having different incentives for the renewable energy providers. But a lot of it comes down to storage. And even though California is moving at great speed to install more storage, there's only so much out there right now.
If you're actually an Edison customer, our company works with the Self-Generation Incentive Program. There's about $20 million left as of this morning, which probably translates about 2 more months if you're in a high fire zone like Malibu, Simi Valley, Santa Clarita, Topanga Canyon, anywhere. If you look at the CPUC high fire map, you actually can get batteries. We do Teslas and also Enphase batteries that are 100% rebated by the state. And you can actually finance it or lease it with solar and pay equal pretty much what you're paying for electricity. So that is one solution that the CPUC has put into place, Sung Hee, of just right now. There's 20 million left, so hopefully they replenish the fund, but we got 2 more months of battery money for those that are victim to blackouts more than others.
Guys, this conversation has been absolutely amazing, but we've got to come to a close. If you could, please follow Georgia, who put this together, and
Thank you,
we've
Georgia.
had some amazing speakers. We've had Joe and Taylor and Robert and Dan. Please follow everybody, and hopefully we can do more talks like this. We appreciate you all. Please, who put this together, and
Thank you,
we've
Georgia.
had some amazing speakers. We've had Joe and Taylor and Robert and Dan. Please follow everybody, and hopefully we can do more talks like this. We appreciate you all. Please follow the speakers, and we'll see you soon.
And thank you so much, Jen, as well, and everybody for being here. Appreciate you all.
Yes, thank you, Jen. Appreciate you. And Robert and Dan.
Thank you all. Thank you.